Yeah.
Are all the Friedmans related?
Not by long shot.
So what chapter are we?
21.
21, it's page 88.
28?
Chapter 21, and we're online and live.
You have Tanya? Yes.
Oh, it's nice.
Yeah.
We can share. They can share.
I'm gonna post a link online.
No, I think we're good. This one actually.
Yeah, I just listened anyway.
Tess, do you want to post a link?
Okay, you ready?
Okay, we're ready to go. The link is coming up. So, last week we did Elul.
Yeah.
We skipped Tanya last week and we did Elul instead. And the week before that we did chapter 20. The Alter Rebbe is talking about, in chapter 20, he's talking about the oneness of Hashem. Before chapter 20, the Alter Rebbe was talking about how even the most uninitiated or the most seemingly disinterested among Jews would give their life literally to not violate Hashem's oneness. In other words, if somebody who is otherwise not very excited about Yiddishkeit, about observance of Torah and mitzvahs, were to be threatened with death or commit idolatry, even such a person would choose death. And the question is, we know that people can give their lives for things that they're passionate about. But what sense does it make for somebody to give their life for something that they're not passionate about? And the Alter Rebbe was explaining that that's the nature of the Jewish soul. That's the nature of the neshama. That when the neshama gets stirred, when the neshama that can be that holy soul that can be asleep at times gets inspired, then it becomes so real and so powerful that a person can feel unable to resist its desire to remain connected to Hashem, even though until whatever it was that stirred the soul happened, they were disinterested. So the Alter Rebbe says, in order to understand this better, you need to understand the oneness of Hashem. That's how the Alter Rebbe got onto the subject. If you understand what it means that Hashem is one, then you can understand a little better this idea of somebody being willing to sacrifice their life. So that's that. So in chapter 20, the Alter Rebbe was explaining the oneness of Hashem, how even after Hashem created the world, he remained absolutely one. We talked about in the last couple of classes that it's not Hashem Yachid, right? We don't say Hashem is the only God. We say Hashem is one, which means he's one with everything. There is nothing besides God. God is absolutely one, meaning the only existence, the only true existence. So then what is everything else? Said everything else is simply the effect of God's speech. And because, like when a human being speaks, you say a sentence, that sentence isn't significant to you. It doesn't change you in any way. And it certainly doesn't have any real effect or importance on your neshama that has the faculty of speech. Your soul can speak endlessly, forever and ever and ever. If you didn't die, you can talk forever. So one sentence doesn't really equal much. So if that's true of us, then certainly it's true of Hashem. So when God said, "Let there be light," and then light happened because he said, "Let there be light," that doesn't change the fact that God is still just him. He's not impressed with.
But the light himself also become part of God.
It's his
also
creation.
one.
So that's what we're going to talk about more now.
But God talking, it's also part of them. It's not like a human.
That's what we're going to talk about now. That's chapter 21. Perfect. So the question is, Now that we know that a human being, when a human being speaks, the words that you speak are not significant relative to your essence, relative to your ability to speak. Same as with Hashem creating the world, everything that God creates, He creates with speech, and therefore nothing is really of any major importance to Him. Now, the Alter Rebbe is going to start this chapter with, there's a little bit of a flaw in the analogy. In general, in Torah, when there's an analogy, the analogy has to be as close to the analog as possible. There's a mashal and a nimshal. The mashal, the analogy has to match what it's trying to explain, not just in one detail. So here, the Alter Rebbe points out that there is actually a flaw or an aspect of the analogy of the human speech to God's speech that doesn't carry through. That's what we're going to start with chapter 21. V'hine, Perek Chaf Aleph. I've said this a number of times, but it's not a bad idea. It's worth the effort to try to read some of the words in Hebrew, say some of the words, use your voice, speak the words. Torah words are holy and they're worth expending some effort on. So v'hine, midas hakadosh baruch hu shaloi kemidas basar v'dam. The nature of God, whatever that means, the midah, the attributes of God are not like those of the human being. She'adam kishemedaber dibur, when a person speaks something, speaks a spoken word, harei hevel hadibur shebepiv hu murgash, the breath of the spoken word of the speaking in the mouth is felt, v'nir adavar b'fnei atzmai, and it appears to be something independent. Muvdal misharsha is separated from its source, shein eser b'chinas hanefesh atzma, which the source of the speech is the 10 faculties of the soul. In other words, when I say something, it came from my mind, from my soul, from my opinions, from it. That's where it started. But once I say it, it's not me anymore. They say about I don't remember where the story comes from. Somebody had spoken ill of others, lashon hara, was trying to figure out how to atone for it, and whoever it was that he went to told him to take a pillow and cut it open and let all the feathers scatter. He said, okay. He opened the pillow and let them scatter, and then he said, okay, now what do I do? He says, now go put all the feathers back in. He said, I can't. They went with the wind. It's impossible. He said, that's what lashon hara is. Once words leave, they're on their own. You have no control over them anymore. That's when a human being speaks, and that's why the analogy doesn't carry over to Hashem. That's where the analogy breaks down, because nothing can go outside of Hashem. When you speak, when I speak, the words leave us, and they're on their own. They're a new thing. When God speaks, there's nowhere for it to go outside of Him. But God, His speech does not become separate from Him, because there's nothing that's separate from Him. There's no place, there's no space in existence that's devoid of God. And therefore, that's why His speech is not really like our speech. Not a good it's not a perfect analogy in that sense. Just like His thoughts are not like our thoughts. The Torah says, the prophet says that God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts. And also, my ways are beyond your ways, are much higher, much greater than your ways. In other words, just like God's thoughts remain inside Him, right? What's the difference between speech and thought? Thought is inside, it's part of you. Once you speak, it's separate from you. So the Alter Rebbe is saying here that just like in God, like in us, the thought remains me. In Hashem, it's the same way with speech. It remains Him. If you remember in chapter 20, he went through this very elaborate description of how speech comes into being. into being, how it happens, how it goes from a thought from an idea into a thought into spoken words. And he talks about this idea of the letters of the words. Letters, in other words, a word constructed of letters, a word that has a particular form, doesn't happen in the idea. In other words, in the sechel, in the intellect. The idea doesn't have words in the intellect. The words happen only in thought. Once you start thinking about it, now you have to think about it in words and sentences. But before you think about it, when it's just an idea that you have, it doesn't yet have structure like that. It has the potential for structure. It has all of that structure in potential, like a seed, but it doesn't have structure yet. It doesn't have letters and words. They talked about that a lot in chapter 20. And then here he's saying that the human being, when we think something, that thought that we're having, in a way, draws the idea out of the intellect into the process of thought, which means even before we speak, obviously when we speak, the word is outside of us, right? The sentence now has departed. It's its own thing. It's a spoken sentence. But even a thought is not really as essentially one with me as the idea is, right? Or right at the beginning of Tanya, we said that there is the sechel, which is where my ideas are, my intellect. And then there is the machshava, which is one of the three garments of the soul, which means it's external. It's not essential to the neshama. So when we think, the process of thinking is already a step away from the essence of the neshama. So even before we speak, we've already kind of diminished the perfect connection between me and my idea. As long as it's an idea, it's one with me. Once I speak it, it's completely separate. When I think it, it's not completely separate, but you can't call it completely one with me either. It's kind of, it already started to depart from who I am.
So it makes his way out, basically.
Right.
Starts in an idea, then it becomes a thought, and then you speak it out.
Right. And that's going farther and farther away from the etzem haneshama, the essence of who you are, right? By Hashem, so he says, in speech, no way. Everything remains just like in thought. In other words, just like by Hashem, when he thinks, whatever that means, God's thoughts are not outside of him like they are by us, and they're certainly not separated from him like our speech is. His speech and his thoughts are all always absolutely one with him. That's the point he made so far. Make sense?
Yeah.
So means whatever he thinks is one with him, just like his idea, like.
Right. Nothing, not separated from him at all. Unlike us, we are always, our speech, it's gone. It's not me anymore.
Right, so we can, I can say something, then regret it. I can think something, then think something different, and my first thought is irrelevant anymore.
So that's true also. But what he's saying here is that the words that you speak are not part of you anymore. The words went out of you, they've separated from you, right? So now, V'lo nikra dibur yisbarach b'shem dibur rak al derech mashal. He's asking without asking. He's answering a question without asking it. The question is, there's this concept of anthropomorphosis.
Anthropomorphizing.
Anthropomorphizing means you use a word that is a human thing in an attempt to describe God. So without getting into how literal but when we use a word like, for example, speech, God spoke, we're using a word that we relate to ourselves. I know what it means when I speak.
Right.
So in my mind, that it sounds like it should be the same thing. If it's the same word, and by the way, Torah uses the same word, right? And you look in Torah, it says, uh, Moshe spoke to Aaron, it's the same word as God spoke to Moshe. So if the Torah uses the same word for God speaking to a human or a human speaking to a human, that must mean that there's a similarity. So the Alter Rebbe here is asking a very simple question. In that case, why does the Torah use the word speaking? Why does the Torah describe God speaking as speaking if it's not like the human speech at all? Human speech is, I speak, and it's now the words are separate from me and they're off doing their own thing.
Because the act is the same act.
But what's the act? When I speak, something gets created?
To release something into the world outside of yours.
In my own mind, I'm creating something when I speak, but not anywhere else. So one of the effects maybe, but when's the last time you said something and when God says let the sea split, the sea splits. I'm sorry, that's when he raises his
It's
arm.
working with
When God-
Alexa and
Right, Alexa, but then it's Alexa that's doing it, not you. No, so here's the thing. The Alter Rebbe is going to tell us that there's actually two different effects of speech, and you touched on this. There's the effect of speech, which is that the words exit me and they are separate from me. But there's another thing that speech does, and that is it reveals what's inside me. So regardless of whether it went out and did something, went out to be its own thing and sow its own oats, even if it doesn't go out of me, it's revealing what's inside me. It's letting somebody else know what's going on inside me. That is true of Hashem also. That's what he's going to say here. The speech of God is not called speech, only by way of analogy, just like when a human being speaks, it reveals to the listener that which was concealed and hidden inside, in your thoughts. The same is true above by God. That light and life force that comes forth from him, from the concealed state to a revealed state, to create worlds and give life to them, nikra b'shem dibur, is called speech. Not because, like our speech, the words exit him and become separate from him, but because, like our speech, it reveals what's inside, that which heretofore was concealed. Those are the 10 utterances with which God created the world. God created the world by saying, let there be light, and there was light. Light knew to come into existence. God revealed his desire to have light. By the way, when God said, let there be light, how did light know he was talking about it? If light never existed before, then what is the name of how does it help to have a name of something that never existed?
because it's thought and it speaks.
It's an extension of itself anyway.
No, but think about this. If you say, I need a radio, we know what a radio is, right? If you tell me jump, I know what jump means, so I jump. But if I say, let there be, and I make up a word for something that doesn't exist, you don't know what I'm talking about.
Because in his imagine he creates whatever he wants, and he decide what he's gonna call it.
So
All things are in.
in the second part of Tanya, Shar Yichud V'Emunah, which maybe we'll get to someday, the Alter Rebbe explains that when Hashem said Yehi Or, he wasn't saying the name of the thing. He was saying the thing. Aleph and Vav and Resh in that order, it's like, what's water?
Mine?
H2O.
Well, okay.
Okay.
Or is more like H2O than water. Make sense?
Water is the name of the thing.
The way Hashem made things is he channeled his creative energy, his godly energy, through a whole bunch of prisms or lenses or veils or however you want to describe them.
So that's how the big explosion is possible. I mean, is a way to see it.
Maybe. But the point is that Aleph and Vav and Resh in that order create from the light of Hashem that outcome. That's what happens to the light when Hashem channels the light through the letters Aleph, Vav, Resh. What if God channels the light through the letters Beis, Sin, Resh? You end up with meat. because it went through those letters, not because meat already existed and it knew to come into existence when God said, "Let there be meat." Anyway, like that, and that's the point is that that's what it means when it says these are the 10 utterances with which Hashem created the world. When God spoke the words to create the world were revealing that which was inside of him, and when his desire and his will becomes revealed, stuff happens.
So does that mean that word is expression, human?
Yes, everything that exists is an expression of him.
And it's actually part of him.
Yes,
So it
exactly.
truly means that if we are the way we are with all our flaws, there's nothing wrong.
Exactly. The only thing wrong with us is our wrong choices. Everything else is perfect.
There is not a bad boy,
But
there is
is
a
the
boy, there is
wrong
bad boy.
choices actually bad?
Huh?
Are these a bad thing to make bad choices?
Yeah.
Why?
What if your choice is
How
Because
do
that's
you-
Because that's the one thing he gives us complete control over, our choices.
Right, but in order to choose right, you have to choose wrong. Because then that's how you know what's right, what's wrong.
Maybe we'll talk about that around Yom Kippur. It's true. Obviously, it's true because God in Torah, God created teshuvah. So how do you ever?
Everything a man did was the same.
Well, not the first, but
Well,
pretty close.
but it's
Was
like
it long?
if you have natural empathy, if you naturally understand what integrity is, then you don't need to know what it's like to feel pain, to know that it's wrong, because pain,
Yeah, it's a shorter route.
right?
Having pain is a shorter route to having
What if your
empathy
choices
than
aren't
real
your own?
empathy. Your choices are your own,
What if they're not?
then they're not your choices. Why are you calling them your choices if they're not your choices?
Because some say
So
that.
technically,
Let's say you're under the influence or something.
Then that's the alcohol choosing. And I'm being generous by assuming it was alcohol.
but, so the sin of the first man, if we talked about Adam, if they weren't sin then, we wouldn't get here. It would be, we would stay in heaven and then what is the point? The
You're right.
point was to sin.
You're right. You're right. But that's a Yom Kippur topic, not a Perek Chaf Aleph topic. But you're right. That obviously, that's why I'm saying, that's why Hashem created teshuvah. How would you ever get to teshuvah if we didn't have sin? The answer is you can have teshuvah without sin. That's a whole separate topic also, but you're right. Right. Bezrat Hashem. V'chein shar kol haTorah neviim uksuvim. Also, in the rest of Torah, the prophets, the writings, sheisigu hanaviim b'mara nivuasam. When a prophet perceives something through the vision of their prophecy, read that sentence carefully. He really twists that one a little bit. He spins it perfectly to make it exactly what he wants it to be. Hisigu hanaviim b'mar'e nivuasam. The prophets perceived with the vision of their prophecy. Why does he just say they saw in their prophecy? Because they don't really see, they perceive. Anyway, without getting into the weeds over there. So now we understand how his speech and his thoughts are absolutely, utterly, completely one with him, absolutely. Derech mashal, for example, like a human being's speech while it's still in the intellect, not while it's in thought, while it's in koyach chachmasei v'sichloi, in his ability to know. In other words, your intellect. While your information that you're going to speak is still in the intellect, that's how one God's speech is with him. Whether it's in the intellect, or whether it's a desire in the heart, like we spoke last week, before the thought goes to the heart and then from the heart back up into the mind to process it with a structured thought. Because then the letters of this particular thought or these spoken words that come from this desire, they were bekoyach belev. They were just potential in the heart. They didn't have structure yet. They were in the heart. They were absolutely one with the person feeling this feeling, with the potential to become a structured thought or structured sentence, structured words spoken. And while they're still in the heart, in the state of potential to become speech, they are completely one with their source. You can't really, there's no separating them from where they come from. That is the intellect in the mind, or the emotions in the heart, the desire in the heart. While an idea is still an idea in the intellect, and a feeling is still a feeling in the heart, they are absolutely one with the person. That's how Hashem's speech is with him, even after he spoke it. That's the analogy. The same is true by way of analogy. That's how Hashem's speech is one with him. Even after God's speech comes out to create the worlds, with absolutely no change. There's no change to God from before he spoke it till after he spoke it. It's all exactly the same. And before him there is absolutely no change whatsoever. A whole universe came into existence. It doesn't change him in any way. Nothing different. Ella el haberuyim. The only change is from the perspective of the created beings, who receive their sustenance, their life force from his speech. When that speech comes out into the activity of creating the worlds, that is enclosed in the creation to give life to it, by going from like a chain effect of cause and effect. And you have a cause and then an effect. You have a cause and then an effect. The effect becomes the cause for the next effect, and then that effect becomes the cause for the next effect. So it's a chain. So if you really can't separate the last rung of the chain from the first ring of the chain. That's why it's called a chain, because they're connected. It's one chain, even though they're independent rings. Well, they're not really independent, because one leads to the other. If one link in the chain is missing, it's not a chain anymore. Now it's a broken chain. So the same is true with the cause and effect of God's creation. God has his infinite light, and it goes through all of these layers and levels of concealment or reduction. He's going to talk about this in a second. The tzimtzum, which is we talked about earlier in Tanya. Each level, each step down is a cause that creates the effect of the next level down, which becomes the cause for the next level, right? With going down, descending from level to level in many different kinds of tzimtzum, of reduction. By the way, I'm just going to reiterate what we talked about at the beginning of Tanya. When it says down, when we say that it went down, it doesn't mean geographically. It doesn't mean directionally down. It means farther away from the source, farther away from the essence of Hashem. By the way, and farther also doesn't mean spatially far. It means less aware of. Where there's more concealment, so less awareness of. That's far. So less awareness means distance, and distance means reduced spiritual level, so that's down. So we say higher and lower spiritually. Essentially what we mean is more aware of God or less aware of God. Okay? So it goes through all of these different reductions and descents, spiritual descents, to the point to the point where physical creations can receive their sustenance, their ability to be from him, but without being completely overwhelmed by him to the point where they can't exist. So this is this perfect balance. In order for a physical world to exist, God has to give his creative energy to the created being. But if it's his created being, his creative energy, how could a physical thing ever exist in the presence of God himself? The answer is,
You give us the like any minute.
besides that he gives us every minute, how could you exist in the presence of Hashem? It should completely overwhelm you and blow you away. And you should melt away in the awesomeness of Hashem.
But we say Hashem is hidden.
So it's because Hashem hides. Question: if Hashem hides, then how can we exist? Either he's revealed and we can, and we can exist because he gives us his, or he has to hide, so we should not exist, and then we can't exist. The answer is it's a perfect balance. It's the perfect combination of revelation and hiding that you can have a physical world. And that's why, by the way, the Rebbe always mentions this, that the olam hazeh tachton she'en tachton lemata himen. It's the lowest world that you can't have a world lower than this. Why? Why can't you have a world lower than this?
But this world can continue deep down.
Yeah, it can get pretty low.
Yeah.
Right. But one second, think about this. The expression says that this world is the lowest world. You can't have a world lower than this. What does low mean?
Wait.
Far
away from God.
Farther away from God.
But not farther away, literally. It means
Spiritual.
less aware. Right? So you can't have a world that's less aware of God than this world. Why? Because any less, you're not receiving any creative energy anymore from Hashem. So there's no way to exist. On the other hand, it's as far as you can possibly go in concealing Hashem's presence and still exist. That's what it means when we say that this world is the lowest world. So Hashem wants to be welcomed into, right? Hashem wants a dirah, wants a dwelling place in the lowest world. That means he wants to create a world that is as far as possible from Hashem's oneness without no longer existing because there's no more Hashem there. That's impossible. So the world has to be so far away that you literally can deny the existence of Hashem, but there's just enough of Hashem's revelation that the world should exist. That's the world that we live in. We live in a condition, in a space, in a whatever, where we have just enough revelation of godliness to exist, but not enough to recognize that that's why we exist.
So can there be multiple worlds simultaneously?
We're told that there's one. In theory, there could be, but we're told there's one.
So sorry for the ignorant question, but does it mean literally that there's no hell?
No, hell is part of this.
But it's more aware than in here.
Have you been to New Jersey?
You know why people in New York are so depressed?
I don't even settle as New Jersey.
Newark, not just
Newark.
Um,
Pennsylvania.
Hell isn't a place, in a certain sense. Hell is a process that the neshama goes through
Right.
to clean itself off before it goes back to being just a neshama again. But we'll leave that for
So
another
when you
time.
say we're not moving planets,
No, we mean everything, the whole creation.
the whole creation. So if it's the whole creation, of course, there is no low, there is no high, there is this creation, that's it, no?
That's what I'm saying. Low doesn't mean direction. It means how far away from awareness of Hashem.
Okay, are there different worlds that are close?
Yeah.
So the
So what
idea-
we know, what we see.
Spiritual
is
worlds. There's the world of Atzilut, the world of Bria, the world of Yetzirah.
Even this world just few hundred years ago, Columbus found America.
There's only one
Spiritual, well, there's only one physical world.
with multiple spiritual.
Yes. Spiritual worlds. And that's what he's talking about, how the light of Hashem created all these different spaces until it got to here, till it became physical. Each of those conditions, which we learned about in, what was it, chapters, I don't remember, 6, 7, 8, or whatever those chapters were, where he talked about the different worlds and how in one world you have the concept of creation before it becomes physical, and another world you don't yet have creation, you just have the formation of concepts. So all the different levels of descent away from the essence of God, meaning less aware of the essence of God and more potential for self-awareness of something else until you get to a physical world. So you have all these gradations, all these levels that until we get here.
So the point of the Mashiach is to break the balance of how much revelation there is to bring more godliness into the world.
In a way, yeah. The point of when we bring Mashiach, that means that we bring godliness into a world that doesn't naturally have godliness by the way it's created. It naturally does not have any revealed godliness, and we, through our own free will, introduce the revelation of the godliness in this world. So we take why all mitzvahs have some physical implement. Why do you always have to use something physical to do a mitzvah? Sit on top of a mountain and meditate. That would be the most spiritually perfect thing to do, right? Wrong. The most spiritually perfect thing to do is to take the physical world and make it holy. That's the idea.
So
Why is it in an yeshiva?
Because you have to learn how to do it, and then you go do it.
For how long?
Good question. I'm not getting into politics.
Would that go beyond just Earth? So like, would our actions on Earth, like let's say there's life on another planet, would that break scale?
Yeah, in the universe. Yeah, in all of creation.
So then is the idea that we'd all be doing the same thing simultaneously? Like, what if we're hung up because some other planet is at the same level?
It's a fascinating question. There was actually a scientist who was studying life on Mars and asked the Rebbe about it. And the Rebbe, he was becoming more observant. He was thinking, maybe I should just quit doing this because Torah says there isn't any intelligent life anywhere else. So why am I doing this? So the Rebbe said, continue studying. Not because you're going to find anything, essentially something along the lines of, not because you're going to find anything, but because to stop studying as a scientist would suggest that God can't put intelligent life anywhere else. It's an interesting question for some other time. Let's try to finish this chapter. It's not a very long chapter. We only have a few lines left. Let's try to finish this, okay? Anybody?
Yes.
The whole tzimtzumim hem bechinas hester ponim. What are these tzimtzumim? What is this reduction? It simply means we're right by the little siman, whatever that thing is on the side of the column. The kol hatzimtzumim hem bechinas hester ponim. Where is it on the page?
It's on the middle.
Page what in the middle?
90.
Page 90 in the middle. The kol hatzimtzumim hem bechinas hester ponim. All of these reductions that we're referring to, that we're talking about, are basically the concealment of God's face. The word face in Hebrew, panim, also means pnim, which means the essence, the internal. So it's the concealment of God's essence. Lahastiru lahalem ha'or v'achayas, to hide and to conceal the light and the vitality hanimshach midiburi yisborech, that come from his speech. It shouldn't be revealed in this great revelation, because then the lower creations won't be able to sustain, won't be able to maintain in the revelation of absolute godliness. The God, it's like I'm not going to try to give you an analogy. If godliness were revealed, if God's essence were revealed to us, we would expire in ecstasy. We couldn't exist like that. And therefore, and that's why, because of these reductions that come all the way down, so that we can exist without being overwhelmed by the awesome revelation of godliness, because of that concealment, that's why to us it seems that all of this light of God, it seems to us that all of that light and all of this creation that God created is something other than and separate from God's essence. Even somebody who believes in God and believes that God created the world, you look at the world and you think God created this, and then it's something other than. Because of the tzimtzumim, because of these reductions and concealments and all these veils that God puts over the revelation of his self, it's because of those concealments that we can think that we're something other than God, that we are separate from him, because of those things that he did in order to allow us to exist. But God himself, none of these tzimtzumim, none of these concealments or veils block out his vision. doesn't change anything for him, doesn't hide anything from him. Kidiksiv, as it says in the verse, Gam choshech lo yachshech mimeka v'gomer. The verse says, darkness does not darken anything for you, God. In other words, concealment doesn't change the fact that God sees everything. You can't conceal anything from God. Why?
We can see.
Why? Because he's so strong he can see anything?
No, because he is the creation, it's him, it's that.
Exactly. B'diuk. Mishum she'ein hatzimtzum v'alavushim davar nifra meni yisbarach chas v'shalom, because the concealments itself, the veil that he puts over, is also him, because there's nothing besides him. So he's going to hide himself with a veil so you can't see him. But the veil is also him. You don't know that. But it's just him. So of course it's not going to block him. Everything is him. Elo kahadin kamsa shelavusha minei ubei. Listen to this analogy that the Alter Rebbe uses from the Medrash. Like a turtle whose cover is part of itself.
Makes so much more sense.
You want to know how the tzimtzum doesn't block God? It is God. Just like the shell of a turtle is the turtle.
Right, but when the turtle is in the shell, you can't see it. He's
You
existing
can't
in
see
his
his
own
head.
world.
But
You see him, you not see his head.
the turtle didn't
No,
create. But the
in
turtle
English-
didn't create a universe.
In English, here it says, like the snail whose garment is part of his body.
The snail?
Yeah, snail. So it says.
And that,
Huh.
thunderbolt.
Same idea.
I wonder why it says snail.
It says snail.
But snail can live without the part.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering why it says snail.
Without his,
You're thinking of a hermit crab.
I don't
yeah, a lot of snails without ours, like a
That's
lot of
slug.
them.
Slug. Slug. It's different. Yeah, I don't know why it says that here.
It's like a forest, right? Like a forest. It's from the outside. Right. You can't see.
Yeah. That's it.
Individually constructed, but it's actually
Yeah.
a forest. So that is. the forest.
That's where that expression, you lose sight of the forests for the trees, something like that.
Yeah.
So, Moshe Kosov ki havaya hu Elokim, just like it says in the verse, which we say so often, Hashem hu ha-Elokim, God is Elokim. By the way, since we're already in the month of Elul, I want to point out to you, remember what we're saying here, because this is so critical on Yom Kippur. When you get to the end of Yom Kippur, you went through the whole 30 days of Elul, and then you went through Rosh Hashanah, and the shofar blowing, and the apple and the honey, and all the things, and then you go through the days of Teshuvah, and then you go through Yom Kippur, you're fasting, you go through the whole thing, sitting in the shul all day, starving yourself, asking Hashem for forgiveness and all this stuff, and you get to the apex, literally the spiritual apex of the Jewish year. And what do? You shout 7 times, Hashem hu ha-Elokim. What does that mean? God is God. What does that mean? He explains it right here.
God is God. God is that manager.
So he explains it right here. Hashem hu ha-Elokim means Elokim is the name of God that he uses where there is tzimtzum. And Hashem, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the 4-letter name of Hashem, is the name of Hashem before there's any tzimtzum. And we say on Yom Kippur, he's saying here, that says it in the verse, Hashem hu ha-Elokim. It's the same thing. There's no difference between the God we know of as the God in creation, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim et haaretz. In the beginning, Elokim created the heavens and the earth, meaning God with tzimtzum. Because without tzimtzum, you can't create heaven and earth. Without those concealments, you can't create. So God with tzimtzum, with concealment, is Elokim. God without concealment is Hashem. When you finally reach the moment of perfection on Yom Kippur, it's when you finally realize and you're able to say with conviction, Hashem and Elokim, same thing. No difference.
What exactly, when you say reduction, when you say tzimtzum, what do you mean?
It means God withholds some of his influence. You ever hear a kid says, a teenager says, my dad lets me be independent.
Wow.
Think about it. My dad lets me be independent.
Yeah. Huh?
That's a tzimtzum, where the father backs off
It's like,
and lets the kid feel like he's independent.
yeah,
That's a tzimtzum.
it's omitting something, like.
Not omitting, it's removing your hands-on influence.
Yeah.
So if you can be present without being obvious, be a fly on the wall, that's your tzimtzum, where you're removing yourself from
What
the.
did they say tzimtzum though? I don't- Like it's.
Tzimtzum means to contract. So God contracts himself.
Or restrict.
No, yeah, so it's
Strict.
like, we say, לצמצם זה כמו מרוכז, like on a string.
It's like a dimmer of God.
Concentration.
Thank you.
So basically, God concentrate himself,
Right.
kind of.
But there's the great debate among the Kabbalists was, is tzimtzum literal or is tzimtzum figurative?
Right.
Because tzimtzum literal, where God concentrates himself and contracts himself away and leaves a space without him, is impossible. There is no space without him. So it doesn't mean literally he removes himself. It means he contracts his influence so that the space where there is that contraction doesn't feel his presence. That's called a tzimtzum. Does it once and does it again and does it hundreds and thousands and millions of times until you end up with this world.
And we mean a spiritual thing.
Well, God, it's not physical, obviously, because God isn't physical. So
Yeah, but like, let's say.
It's not
God
even-
still spreader,
one second,
because
it's not
that's-
spiritual either, because God created spiritual. It's godly. It's not physical or spiritual. It's godly.
It's what we made of. It's what they
But
were.
think as like a dimmer. It's the same light. It can be strong or it can be really low. It's still the same light. If it's gonna be strong, it's maybe you not see well. If it's gonna be a bit low, you're gonna see well. But it's the same light, same wire, same everything. If it's same God, just a bit low so you can handle with it.
Now look what he says here, as is written elsewhere. You want to read? You want to know more about this? Hashem Hu Elokim. Read that second volume of Tanya, Shar Yichud Ve'emunah, which I mentioned before. That second volume of Tanya goes to this in great length, describing the oneness of Hashem and how a world can exist if he removes himself. He doesn't really remove himself, and then how does the world exist in his presence, etc., etc. That's all in Shar Yichud Ve'emunah. Now, v'lachin, and therefore, kamei, before God, kula kila chashiv mamash. Everything is like absolutely nothing before him, because it's all him. It's nothing other than him. That's the bottom line of chapter 21.
Good chapter.
And now we understand
What is Hashem looking?
A turtle.
a snail, a turtle, a snail. Now we understand.
Go ahead.
Now we understand how it's possible for a neshama to exist and suddenly become aware of Hashem and say, I can't be separate from that. It's like, wait a second, where'd you come from? You're 45 years old. You never thought about Hashem before. Now they're telling you to bow to the cross. Who cares? Why are you making such a big fuss? And the person's answer is, I have no idea. I can't do it. Why? Because Hashem is so real and the neshama knows it perfectly. The neshama knows. For the neshama, there's a lot less tzimtzum than for the body.